I sometimes get asked for my book recommendations. So here are 5 books that I think will help you to improve as a software developer. I hope that you enjoy them. Hi, I'm Dave Farley of Continuous Delivery. Welcome to my channel. If you haven't been here before, please do hit subscribe, and if you enjoy it today, hit like as well. I'd like to begin as usual by thanking our sponsors, Harness, Equal Experts, Octopus and SpecFlow. They've been supporting our channel for a while, and please do support them in turn by checking out their links in the description below. I'm about to list my favourite books. Some of these are genuine greats of our discipline, so it's rather presumptuous of me to include an ad for my own book amongst them, alongside these fantastic works. Nevertheless, I'm proud of my new book, Modern Software Engineering, and the reviews so far have been great. So do check it out, and if you like it, leave a review. I didn't just want to give you my top 5 books to make you a great developer. I thought that I'd add some additional colour with some of the books that have had an influence on my career, which is not always the same things as books that will be directly useful to you, and with a few honourable mentions that you really should read. This has actually been quite a lot more difficult than I thought at first. There are so many great books that have influenced me over the years, and there are whole categories of books that I've missed here. But here are my top 5 in reverse order. At number 5, Extreme Programming Explained by Kent Beck. I'm pretty surprised, maybe astonished with myself, that this is so far down the list. This book had a huge impact on me when I read it. It introduced me to ideas that have, with hindsight, shaped my career ever since. This, along with a book called Rapid Development by Steve McConnell, started me thinking for the first time, really, about the fact that how we organise ourselves and approach our work as developers has an important impact on how well we can do. I had been practicing continuous integration for a few years before this, kind of by accident, and the team that I worked on even had a few automated tests, but this book joined all of the pieces together into something that made sense to me. I confess to being sceptical at first when a friend suggested that we try something called extreme programming in our team. But I've come to appreciate the importance and value of the ideas like working in small steps and optimizing for great feedback. Those are my words, not Kent's. I appreciate those ideas even more now with the benefit of 20 odd years of hindsight. The book covers ideas like testing early and often, incremental design, daily deployment, customer involvement, continuous integration, short development cycles, and incremental planning. If you really want to understand what agility means, then read this book. At least for me, this book showed me how the ideas that I partially understood at the time fitted together. Applying this thinking to bigger and more complex projects was really the inspiration that led to my book, Continuous Delivery. I've sometimes described continuous delivery as an approach as a kind of second generation extreme programming. The only reason that this book is not higher up on my list is probably because it is so ingrained in my thinking these days that I don't often return to it. It's been around for a long time, but the ideas in it are just as fresh, and for many people just as challenging, and just as true as they've always been. I sometimes think of something that I think is my idea, and only later realise that that's what Kent really meant all along. The book starts with the opening line: the goal of extreme programming is outstanding software development. Not a bad place to start, really. I mentioned in passing Rapid Development by Steve McConnell. His other great work was Code Complete, a fantastic book, but it didn't quite make my top 5. Next in my list is The Pragmatic Programmer by Dave Thomas and Andrew Hunt. I confess that this wasn't really a very influential book for me. I kind of missed it the first time around, although a lot of my friends were talking about it. I now own the 20th anniversary edition, which is pretty much a complete rewrite. But the book was hugely influential and is packed full of easy to understand, really important practical advice. Like Extreme Programming Explained, it's really easy to read too. but it's densely packed with gems, great ideas on every page. I was reminding myself of the content for this video and was just randomly flicking through the book and reading a bit, and I'll find myself stuck and reading more than I originally planned, nodding and smiling as I went at the ideas and insights. I recommend this book for all developers, but particularly for junior developers who perhaps want a slightly broader perspective than only language syntax. The other book that I'd recommend to juniors, but that doesn't make my list, is Clean Code. I confess that Clean Code has not been one of my favourite books. Nevertheless, lots of people love this book, so it should be on your bookshelf. The reason that it wasn't one of my favourites was mostly because I got to my own ideas on many of these ideas before I got to read it. It's on my bookshelf at least. For me, a much more influential book was actually the Gang of Four book. So this places third on my list, to give it its correct title, Design Patterns by Gamma, Helm, Johnson and Vislides. For a while, this was so famous, so influential, that everyone just referred to it as the Gang of Four book. This is a more computer sciencey book than the others so far, but it introduced me and the world to software patterns. This idea has become a staple now, so pervasive that we have patterns for all sorts of things, but this was the book that introduced it to our discipline. If you've ever used an adapter, an iterator, an observer, a strategy or a flyweight or a proxy, you're relying on the ideas from this book. More than only historical interest though, these things are the tools of our trade still, and understanding them well will help you in your career and to grow you as a good software developer and designer. It's too simplistic, of course, to say follow these patterns and everything will be okay. Patterns don't work like that. But if you have a problem in coding, it's often true that the path has been trodden before. Someone's already seen this problem and they've come up with some answers. That experience is captured in these patterns. For computer sciencey books, the gold standard is probably Donald Knuth's The Art of Computer Programming. This is a very old book. Knuth won the Turing Award, the computing version of the Nobel Prize, in 1974 for his work on this book. Actually, it isn't a book, it's four. Volume 1, Fundamental Algorithms, Volume 2, Semi-Numerical Algorithms, Volume 3, Sorting and Searching, and Volume 4, Combinatorial Algorithms. This is not a book for the faint of heart. This is difficult stuff taken from a very computer science perspective. Bill Gates once said, if you think you're an excellent programmer, read Knuth's The Art of Computer Programming, and then you should send me your resume if you can read the whole thing. So, if you're even nerdier than me, you should probably try this one, but it doesn't make my list. Second on my list is a book that I think we will look back on as an extremely important work in our field. It's Accelerate by Nicole Fosgren, Jez Humble and Gene Kim. This book is subtitled The Science of Lean Software and DevOps. Dr. Nicole Fosgren, the lead author of this book, is these days a partner at Microsoft Research. The book describes the approach taken to collecting and analysing the data from the most scientifically valid study of software development practice that I am aware of. The study was called the State of DevOps Report, and over the period of several years the DORA team collected and analysed tens of thousands of surveys from people working on software projects all around the world. Their peer-reviewed approach presents the most defensible findings about software development performance, and these findings have been somewhat remarkable. Many of the statistics that I quote on this channel come from the State of DevOps Report or the Accelerate book. They found that there is no trade-off between speed and quality. In fact, quite the reverse. They found that high-performing teams outperformed low performers by orders of magnitude for some measures. Deployment frequency, for example. They found that there is a correlation between high-performing teams based on the technical measures of performance that form the basis of their study, stability and throughput, and the financial success of the companies that employ them. The bottom line is that high-performing teams make the companies that they work for make more money. This is an important book because it solves a problem that we had beforehand largely thought to be insoluble. How do we compare the performance of disparate software development teams? The answer, it turns out, is by taking a scientific, sociological, statistical approach and defining meaningful measurements that make sense for everyone. The authors of this book have made a substantial contribution to our field, to my mind. Stability is a measure of the quality of our work. Throughput is a measure of the efficiency with which we can produce work of that quality. These things matter, whatever the nature of the software that we produce or whatever the industry that we work in. By tracking these measures, you can test almost any idea. Does this change, whatever it is, increase the quality of our systems, or does it increase the efficiency with which we can produce things? If it makes either of these things worse, it's probably a bad idea. I think this book provides us with a means to step beyond merely guessing about what works and instead measuring it. There were lots of books that I thought about in coming up with this list. Some of them I use as tools frequently, like Gojko Adzik and David Evans' book, 50 Quick Ideas to Improve Your User Stories, which includes the best description of a list of techniques to decompose stories into smaller pieces than I've ever read. Others were completely essential tools in the early part of my career, but have become less relevant now. My copy of the Peter Norton Programmer's Guide to the IBM PC is so beaten up that the pages barely are able to stay inside the cover. And I'm fairly sure that this is the second copy that I bought because the first one fell apart through use. This was from the days before the public internet, and so it was an essential reference and in daily use. Kernighan and Ritchie on C, Stroustrup on C++ are in a similar category. Charles Petzold books on Windows programming. I cut my teeth on Windows programming from learning from Petzold's books, which was the Bible in those early days. I still own several editions as it evolved over time alongside Windows. To be honest though, all of these books have not really stood the test of time. I may value them for sentimental or nostalgic reasons, but I can't imagine anyone, unless they're doing some kind of weird retro computing stuff, using them as tools for learning for modern software development. There are other categories of books that stand up better though. We can think of Knuth, which I've already mentioned, but also things like The Mythical Man Month by Fred Brooks, published in 1972. Despite the fact that it's based on his experience of developing an operating system for a computer that you'd only find in a museum these days, it's still as true today as it was in 1972. It talks about the importance of small collaborative teams, the importance of coherence in design, the limits of scaling teams by throwing people at a problem, which includes the first use of that memorable phrase, "You can't make a baby in a month with 9 women." This kind of stuff doesn't really go out of fashion. To illustrate this, my own new book, Modern Software Engineering, published a couple of weeks ago, is currently doing pretty well. It's hovering around the top of the Amazon charts for the topic of software engineering. But it's vying for first place with The Mythical Man Month, published in 1972. I think that may say something interesting about our industry. There are some deeper truths that are more durable over time. Books on specific technology are obviously limited to the time horizon of that technology. Books on these deeper ideas last much longer. Actually, I think that all of the books in my list are in this category. There were many books that I struggled to leave out of my top 5, several of which fall into this broader category too, like Refactoring by Martin Fowler or Team Topologies by Matt Skelton and Manuel Pais, both of which are tools that help us deal with, in this case, very different aspects of the software development problem. And both are books that I'm convinced will have a very long shelf life. My number one pick, though, is an important book, to me at least. It's so closely mirrored how I thought about software and design that I once told the author that I wish that I'd written it. Except I wouldn't have. It's much better thought out than I could have done. It's Domain-Driven Design by Eric Evans. This is not an easy book, but it is full of great ideas. Lots of people don't read to the end and miss some really important stuff as a result. It's easy to give up. There's a lot of stuff in this book, but don't. If you really do struggle with the middle section, skip forward to the section on strategic design. You will be missing out on some really interesting ideas in the refactoring towards deeper insight section and miss some great advice, but there's real gold in the strategic design section of the book. Whatever you do, don't miss reading that. I think that Domain Driven Design is the best book on software design. It's certainly the best that I've ever read. The ideas of bounded context and ubiquitous language inform how I approach design, and lots of the ideas described in the book have become commonplace as a way to think about things. Lots of people have heard of things like anti-corruption layers without ever having read the book, for example. I think that reading this book will make you better at software design. So that's my list, but I've one more wild card to add. This is actually not a software book. But if you're sufficiently nerdy like me and at all interested in science, then the most influential book on my thinking for a very long time has been The Beginning of Infinity by David Deutsch. This is a hard read, but it's a simply mind-expanding book on the fundamentals and philosophy of science. It's absolutely fantastic. So those are my recommendations. I suppose that it's rather obvious that as an author, these books aren't the most influential books for me. The books that most influence my career are my books. I'm very proud of Continuous Delivery as a book because it's been my pleasure to see the ideas in it help people over the years. I now make a living helping people myself to implement those ideas. I hope you enjoyed my list. My only problem now is how to find the time to reread all of these fantastic books. Thank you very much for watching.